Welcome to the Monday evening masterclass. We're going to take a moment to do our talk tonight on the bodily systems and their channels, very similar to Chinese medicine, where they have what's called meridians that move throughout the body. We also use those channels in Ayurveda are called the shrotas, and they're very interesting. And I am going to be referring to my notes to make sure, because they're pretty involved. I'm going to be referring to my notes to make sure that we so I give you an idea of how involved these shrotas are, these channels are. And when I'm talking to people about how our channels get mucked up when we're doing cleanses, I'm talking about these channels. People don't realize it. I actually was having a conversation with a lady today, and she was talking about how, oh yeah, I was doing this thing and it caused it ended up blocking these other channels for, I think it was her car. And I said, that's just like the body. That's just like what happens in the body. When you are bringing in stuff that is not healthy, then it becomes excess or it accumulates in the system, in the channels. So the channels are called the shrotas, and we have to have proper flow. So if you do not have proper flow, you can have three different kinds of flow: excess flow, blockage, not enough flow, or you can have basically where there's limited flow. So these types of flow really affect our health. And like I said, in Chinese medicine, it's called the meridians. There are 3 channels that are connected to the environment that bring in nourishment for the body in the form of breath, food, and water. 7 channels that are actually related to the different tissues of the body. And then there's an additional few channels that are for the waste products of the body. And then we also have other channels that are related to reproduction, so like breast milk, menstruation. And we also have a channel that relates to the mind. So I'm going to just tell you these channels really quick. Interested or not interested, it's kind of good to know. The first channel is called, it's relating to prana, and it's called pranavaha. And knowing these names is really not that important, but knowing that it's the channel that carries breath, prana, which is what we call breath. But remember, breath also means vital force, and breath is what brings in energy. So when we talked about the vayus, we talked about that prana is the first of the vayus. It's what brings in our inhale, and it rules and governs energy that comes into the body. So that's also related to this channel. And it is primarily in the respiratory system and circulatory system. The next channel is one that carries food, and it relates to the digestive system. And it originates in the stomach and the left side of the body. So I want to just point out that when we do corpse pose at the end of yoga, when we go in from Shavasana, you will always hear the teacher instructor say, roll to your right side. Why? Because if you roll to the right side, you're promoting relaxation. If you roll to the left side, you're promoting digestion. And that's relating to this channel, digestion. So it governs that left side. The next channel carries water and regulates water metabolism, and it originates in the palate and also the pancreas. And then we have the channel that carries our plasma and the lymph. And it obviously is working with the lymphatic system. It originates in the heart and in the blood vessels. It's also one of the first tissues that receives nutrients from the food that we eat. Plasma is one of the first nutrients. There is a prioritization of when you eat food, it comes in, certain tissues are going to really receive those nutrients first, and then it moves down the list. And that's why your vital reserves, it's so important. If you get depleted, that you are eating correctly and paying attention to what you're bringing in, and that it's nourishing, because what we think is healthy is not necessarily nourishing and is going to help build up those vital reserves. Vital reserves and the ability to build them up are beyond and past all the tissues of the body. So it takes a long time. If you get depleted, it takes a long time to build up those tissues. The next tissues carry blood, and they are in the circulatory system and originate in the liver and spleen. The next tissue, the next channels and tissues are supplying to the muscles, the muscular system, and also originate in the ligaments and the skin. And then we have the channels that supply fat and adipose tissue, and that whole system of fat. Remember, fat is really important. We need it for our nerves. There's a lot of, if you don't have enough fat, you can't metabolize. And then it originates in the kidneys. And then you have the channels that supply the bones and the skeletal system. They originate in the adipose tissue and also in the hips. And then you have the channels that supply our nervous system and the bone marrow, nerve tissue, and that originates in the bones and the joints. And that, just a little tidbit of information, when women move past menopause, they need to be very, very aware of bone density. And bone density, loss of bone density, is a Vata disorder. And it affects our bones and our joints. And that means that the nervous system is also going to be affected. So you can, when you are dealing with that, you've got to also consider the nervous system. Channels that supply our reproductive tissue originate in the uterus and the testes, our genitals. And then the channels that carry sweat, they originate in the adipose tissue and the hair follicles. Then we have channels for elimination that carry feces, and they originate in the colon and the rectum. And then channels that carry urine originate in the urinary system and the bladder and the kidneys. And then we have the channels that carry thought. There is a channel that carries thought. It's not physical in the body, but it is experienced physically. And that is part of what we call the mental psychological system. And it originates in your heart. And we also consider the heart our emotional center, but the heart and the mind are connected. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of heart math, but heart math has been around for quite a few years. And these scientists have found that it is actually the heart that receives impulses before the brain. So they are very much interconnected. Then we have our other two channels that relate to menstruation and breast milk lactation. So those are all the channels, and they become very important because when we eat, when we take in nutrients, these channels can get affected by our environment, how we eat, and how we live. And if you're dealing with excess, you might have something like hyperventilation, hyperacidity, diarrhea, hunger, hypoglycemia, edema, swollen glands, hypertension, in skin problems, spleen, bleeding disorders, and it goes on and on and on the list. Tremors, obesity, excess bone tissue. That's when the channels have excess, and we have to address it. And then when you're dealing with depletion, it's a completely different thing. So if it's dealing with the breath, you're looking at breathing abnormalities. There might be sound or pain with breath. And we've heard this with people. We've heard people who can't breathe very easily, and they have a lot of sound, or you might have a dry tongue or cracking in your tongue. throat issues, pancreas, excessive thirst, low appetite. That's all digestive deficiency of those channels. And then it can go on and on and on. Indigestion, nausea, vomiting, hyperglycemia, loss of hunger, anorexia, nausea, wrinkles, dehydration, rough skin, cracks, vitiation of the tissues, muscular tissues. And so depletion shows up, and it is telling you that it's originating in the channels when all of these symptoms show up. There's a lot of symptoms. I'm not going to go through all of them because this talk could be like a 2-hour talk, but I wanted to give you an idea of the channels and how important they are and why I talk about them and why cleanses are so important. We do not cleanse in the wintertime, by the way. You cleanse in the spring and in the fall. Why they're important? Because you're clearing out these channels and you're helping your body function properly. If you are depleted, then that's a completely different issue. We got to build you up. We got to build up your tissue. But if you have excess or accumulation, then we need to do something to help clear the channels. All right. Reach out to me if you have any questions on that. And if you haven't had an Ayurveda consultation, you guys need to have it done. Okay.